Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be talking about week 6 in the Holmes Theranos trial. You can search this channel for previous week's updates and also for a more detailed video on the background to Theranos and Holmes' journey to the point at which this trial commenced. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit the notification button so that you don't miss out on any future videos. As a reminder, Elizabeth Holmes is in court accused of multiple instances of fraud against doctors, patients and investors in connection with her role as CEO of Theranos, and this is week 6 of that trial.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Before we talk about this week's witness testimony and the goings on at the trial, we'll take a little diversion with the background bonus section. Background bonus. We talked last week about Elizabeth's propensity for spending based on some of the testimony from Paige Williams, her PA, that was released by the prosecution also last week. We've actually found out some more about this and we'll go through that fairly quickly. The first point is that apparently she had not one but 2 PAs. She had 2 dedicated drivers, she had personal security and a publicist who we found out was on a $25,000 a month contract. We heard about Balto the dog last week, and apparently all of these staff had a second role: surrogate dog walkers. Holmes and Bawani also retained a number of lawyers to work on their own personal behalf. Now, it is actually quite normal for a company to provide legal indemnity for its officers, and so for the company to pay for these lawyers is also quite normal. However, what is interesting is that these lawyers were apparently costing several $1 million a month. The question I would ask therefore is whether this money was actually being wisely spent. Now, we don't know the specifics of all the cases that the multiple lawyers were working on, so we'll probably never know the answer to this in any great detail. Even from the early days of the startup, we know Holmes would fly in a private jet to get around the country. In fact, when the Wall Street Journal articles were published and there was some reining in of spend, she would still fly first class, and apparently travel costs for her alone still amounted to tens of thousands of dollars per month. Meals, clothing and other social activities were almost always expensed, and as one of the former employees said, somebody had to be paying for all those Birkin bags. Oh yes, and don't forget a mansion. Yes, the company paid for that as well. And it wasn't just on her personal expenditure that Holmes was excessive. There was opulent spend at the company's HQ as well. Apparently one conference room table cost over $100,000, and of another conference room, former employees said it looked something like the war room from Dr. Strangelove at the end. Well, towards the end of the company's existence, they did have to move to another property, about which former employees used the adjective shithole. And sadly, you could go to Antonio's Nut House, which is a famous Palo Alto bar, any night of the week, and there would be a goodbye gathering for at least one Theranos employee. Holmes' behaviour at the end is also worthy of note. She apparently would act as if nothing was wrong, hugging employees, appearing chipper, according to one source. She would appear in board meetings as if all was fine and dandy. This was despite the fact that the employee or a board member might have just given testimony to the SEC or other government legal wing, which I guess would have been traumatic for some of them. Holmes just didn't seem to pay any heed to this. Unbelievably, at this time, she spent weeks training Balto, the dog she called a wolf, to be a search and rescue dog, which inevitably failed as huskies aren't bred for this. The only word I can think of which sums up this behaviour is denial, and although this is often used as a cliche, it does seem appropriate here. Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. At some point, inevitably, the company stopped paying Holmes, took back the mansion, all the adjuncts were let go, and it was only then that Holmes realised the game was up, and apparently she had a fit. I don't quite know what that means, and I couldn't find out much more about this moment of epiphany, so I'll just leave it at that for now. One diversion we had on Tuesday was a request from the media to the judge to release the jurors' individual questionnaires. Now, these are the questionnaires that the jurors filled out before they were selected. The judge had already told the jurors that these documents would remain confidential, and the judge has said that he will speak with each of the jurors individually before making a decision on the release. The The judges said that the court might have to fall on its own sword in this respect. So we're guessing that if a juror really doesn't want the questionnaire released, then the court will hold it back and the court is just going to have to take responsibility for that decision. And so to this week's witnesses. Stephen Bird, the ex-Safeway CEO. On Tuesday we had the continuing testimony from Bird, who was the CEO of Safeway at that time, and he'd testified last week about his disappointment with the way that the partnership between Safeway and Theranos was going, and how he was irritated by the endless delays with no apparent reason. In hindsight, we can easily see that the delays were almost certainly caused because the Theranos devices were not working. The key to this testimony, in our opinion, is really because we are hearing from Bird about representations Holmes was making about the viability of the Theranos devices. As he is a third party and not a Theranos insider, this becomes a key tenet of the prosecution's case. We heard more about the unravelling of the Safeway-Theranos partnership, and apparently in 2012, which was 2 years after signing the deal with Theranos, Safeway had completed the build-out of 969 store clinics and hired at least 26 phlebotomists. And now a phlebotomist is a person who draws blood for diagnostic tests or to remove blood for treatment purposes. However, Theranos was not ready. They were a year behind the agreed launch date with no real explanation, and Theranos had done some testing on Safeway employees in the Safeway corporate offices, and according to Bird in an email to Holmes, this had operated for almost a year with poor patient experience. Another point which caused Bird to email to Holmes, "This does not feel like a partnership," was when Theranos changed its brand logo without consulting him. As these would appear in Safeway's own stores, it is a very sensitive point which brands are eligible to be put next to Safeway's own brand. "But I have never been more frustrated. I want to help, but you are making it difficult," he continued in the email. When Bird was questioned by the legal defence team, they established the point that Safeway had actually spent hundreds of hours of due diligence on Theranos. Now, in simple terms, due diligence is essentially a process of fact-checking representations made by one or more parties. In this case, in a commercial relationship, and this can be legal, financial, technical, physical, etc., etc. One of the key points made was that lab directors at Johns Hopkins University and the University of California were consulted by Safeway about Theranos technology. Bird said that he'd arranged for a dinner with Holmes and an oncologist, and the latter claimed that if the company could do what it claimed, it would be a game changer. Wade Miquelon. On Tuesday we had the testimony of Miquelon, who was Walgreens' CFO and who is the prosecution's 11th witness. We heard about the pitch that Holmes gave him when he travelled to Silicon Valley. A key representation made by Holmes in that meeting was that Holmes said that their devices could run 95% of all conventional lab tests and get results in about 20 minutes. Holmes wanted to launch a partnership almost immediately after that meeting in April 2010, and remember that this was at the same time that they were progressing with the Safeway partnership. The partnership eventually did come to fruition in 2013 with an agreement to put Theranos devices in dozens of Walgreens stores. This inevitably failed, and in 2016 Walgreens sued Theranos for $140 million. We believe that this was eventually settled for around $30 million. Based on the presentations Miquelon saw, Theranos was better, faster, cheaper than its competitors, and we thought this was one of the most exciting companies we'd seen. He also said we were very excited about forming a partnership. Very interestingly, the presentations went beyond just the blood analysis. They said that the company could perform wellness tests in relation to things like obesity and diabetes. Also, personalised health assistance could be provided for patients and be available via a cell phone. They also said that Walgreens would earn more than $2 billion in revenues with a gross margin of $650 million through the Theranos partnership. The prosecution with Miquelon then started to zero in on some of the key evidence they're going to have to rely on to prove their indictments. Now remember, one of the key representations Holmes had made to investors was that their labs had had independent due diligence reports by some of the leading pharmaceutical companies. One of these reports was sent to Microlon and was by a company called Schering-Plough Research Institute, and apparently the report was very impressive. In other words, it painted Theranos in a good light. Okay, so the first clue as to what was going on was when the prosecution pointed out the spelling of Schering-Plough Research Institute. Apparently they'd got their own company name wrong. Microlon said he hadn't noticed this at the time. Let's just remind you of what the prosecution said in their opening argument weeks ago. They said that a report with a Pfizer letterhead that Holmes had provided to Walgreens had been secretly drafted at Theranos to endorse its technology. Pfizer did not write this, Assistant US Attorney Bob Leach told jurors on September the 8th. Pfizer did not put its logo on this. Pfizer did not make the conclusions in this report. In fact, it came to the opposite conclusions. Okay, so we have them looking at the Schering-Plough document at this point, but hopefully you can now see where this is going. How and when we will get to the Pfizer document is still to be seen. We had the defence team next with their turn at cross-examination. Kevin Downey, attorney for the defence, asked Microlon what due diligence Walgreens did before partnering with Theranos. Apparently Walgreens had hired a lab to review Theranos tests, Microlon said. They were interpreting data they were given as opposed to taking the machine apart, if you will, he said. Text message saga. We had more text released this week between Holmes and Balwani, 36 pages of them in total. We saw some more of the sentimental gushing love text that we'd seen in prior releases. For example, Holmes to Balwani, I adore you, Tiger. Holmes to Balwani, infinite love. Balwani to Holmes, everything is empty without you. You are the soul of everything. Beautiful stuff. In one text that we found interesting, Balwani commented to Holmes, you sound terrible, and usually when you get sick you try to be a martyr, so please rest and get better. Sick leaders are not a sign of confidence, as you know. And we mention this because this doesn't sound like a very abusive relationship, as Holmes is claiming. Also to note is that these text messages were exchanged in 2015, so we know their relationship lasted at least a decade and at least till 2015. And don't forget that Holmes was making representations to investors, patients and doctors about the Theranos machines. So one interesting text from Balwani to Holmes encouraged her to change claims on the company's websites and, in quotes, Balwani to Holmes, to something more humble and accurate. Robert Amenta, investigator at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Robert Amenta took the stand on Wednesday, and his role was to explain to jurors how wire transfers work. Essentially, under the indictment, the prosecution need to show that wire transfers actually took place. In other words, that Holmes and or Balwani made representations to investors which were lies, and as a result, interstate transfers of money via wire took place. Wire transfers are so common these days, though, that this testimony was very short. Unfortunately, the screens in court broke down during his testimony, leading the trial to be adjourned until Thursday. Late night court filings. Late Wednesday, Holmes' lawyers filed a motion to block jurors from seeing a letter sent by a federal regulator in 2016. This letter describes how Theranos' efforts to improve its labs had failed and listed sanctions that the CMS, that's the Centre for Medicare and Medicaid Services, intended to impose. Included amongst the sanctions was the potential to revoke its license to operate a lab in California. Theranos appealed the letter and later made a settlement. Now, Holmes' lawyers say that the sanctions findings are hearsay and therefore shouldn't be seen. Judge Davila ruled that there were actually certain parts of the letter, like the use of the phrase, in quotes, not credible when applied to Theranos, that should not be put in front of the jurors, and the full letter couldn't be introduced. An email on the subject, however, received by Theranos could be used. Nimish Javeri, Walgreens executive. Nimesh testified on Thursday that Walgreens had been disappointed in how many patients were still getting blood drawn the traditional way rather than via a finger prick. In February 2014, we heard that 43% of patients were still having a venous draw, and this did get down to 39% in May 2014. Nimesh said that the number was too high and that Walgreens wanted it to be zero. Balwani had said that it would get to below 5% by the end of the year, which never happened. Theranos provided a number of excuses as to why they couldn't deliver on their promises. Walgreens scaled back their rollout of the Theranos centres to 200 from 500 due to the continuing failures. The patient experience needed to improve, he said, and he had sent an email saying that, in quotes, "we need to have a documented detailed plan on both," referring to both the tests and the customer experience, or it will be difficult for me to continue expansion beyond Arizona. Walgreens never got beyond 40 centres. A number of texts were read out from about this time between Balwani and Holmes, and in one we saw that Balwani sent to Holmes, "I told him we were surprised by the article as much as they were," and this is referring to the Wall Street Journal articles which were coming out at that time. At one point, Nimesh, who was reading out some of the texts, had to read out "Love you too," which got some chuckles in the court. Week 6 in a nutshell. As usual, we'll try to condense the whole week down to the bare essentials. We had Steve Bird, the ex-Safeway CEO. He was disappointed with the Safeway Theranos partnership. Theranos were a year behind their rollout target. There was poor patient experience. And Safeway undertook hundreds of hours of due diligence on Theranos. And Steve was told by an expert that Theranos tech would be a quotes game changer if it worked. We had Wade Mickelon, Walgreens CFO. Holmes told him that they would deliver 95% of conventional lab tests with results in 20 minutes. Walgreens sued Theranos for $140 million when the partnership failed. He had seen presentations which claimed things like Theranos were better, faster, cheaper, and Walgreens were told to expect $2 billion in revenues and a gross margin of $650 million through the partnership. We had the pharmaceutical report produced by the Schering-Plough Research Institute, and we had hints there from the prosecution that this was fake, although this was never explicitly proven in court. Walgreens undertook significant due diligence on Theranos, including testing results from Theranos owned devices. We had the continuation of the text message saga. We saw many more of the gushing love texts between Holmes and Balwani, although we did see one where Balwani was telling Holmes to make their website, in quotes, more humble and accurate. We had Robert Amanta, investigator at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who was there to explain how wire transfers worked. Finally, we had Nimesh Javeri, the Walgreens executive, and through his testimony we learned that Theranos had promised to get finger prick testing down to below 5%. We know that it never got to below 39% in their stores. Walgreens never got beyond 40 wellness centres versus the 500 plus that was envisaged at the start of the partnership. We saw texts from Balwani during his testimony, including one where he said he was, in quotes, surprised by the Wall Street Journal articles as much as you were. Well, that's it for now. Again, another very busy week. And you'll have noted that the court sat on Thursday this week instead of the usual Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. The court is trying to include the extra day to try to speed up the process, and we'll catch up on Friday's testimonies in next week's video. Please don't forget these are still all prosecution witnesses at the moment. And thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification button so that you don't miss out on future videos when they are published.